Okay, I want you to picture this. It's 1845. Two ships, and these aren't just any ships, they are absolute masterpieces of Victorian engineering.
Right, the pinnacle of technology for the time.
Exactly. And they're carrying the full tide of the British Empire along with 129 of the fittest, most ambitious sailors you could find. And their mission.
To do what no one had ever done before, to conquer the last great unknown on the map, the Northwest Passage.
They were equipped with things that sound almost like science fiction for that era. Steam engines, central heating, enough canned food to last for 3 years. They were, for all intents and purposes, invincible.
Or so they thought. The thing is, they were anything but. Those two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, they sailed north and just vanished.
Straight into a historical black hole.
Completely. Not a single man out of 129 ever came home. And for the better part of a century, the Arctic just held that secret. It became one of the greatest and maybe one of the most tragic cold cases in all of history.
And this is where the story, for me, just gets absolutely terrifying. Because when the truth finally, slowly, started to get pieced together, from bodies perfectly preserved in the permafrost, from scattered human bones, from these desperate little notes left in stone piles, the reality of what happened to them was so much worse than anyone's darkest nightmares.
It's a story of a slow, agonizing breakdown. Fueled by disease, yes, but also by a profound betrayal by the very technology they trusted. And it ends with a horror that the Victorian world just flat out refused to believe.
So that's our mission in this deep dive. We're going to unpack the sources, the ship's logs, the forensic reports, the notes, and, so critically, the accounts from the local Inuit people who were the only actual witnesses to the final act of this tragedy.
It's a story about what happens when human ambition and technological arrogance collide with an environment that is just completely, utterly indifferent to them.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Why? Why this massive obsession with the Northwest Passage in the mid-1800s? What was so important about this one stretch of ice and water that the British Empire was willing to throw everything at it?
It really was the final frontier. For the British Empire at its absolute peak, finding a way through the Canadian Arctic was the ultimate prize. Geopolitically, commercially, it was everything.
Like a mythical shortcut to Asia.
Exactly. A shortcut that would slash the time it took to get to the lucrative markets in China and the East Indies. It would give them a massive strategic advantage for their navy, and maybe more than anything, it was about glory. It was about planting a flag on the last unconquered piece of the global puzzle.
The holy grail of map making, basically.
That's a perfect way to put it. They'd mapped so much of the world, but this one icy maze just kept defying them. And previous attempts had failed, some of them horribly. But in 1845, the Admiralty was certain this was it. This was the expedition that would succeed.
So they spared no expense. They brought out the big guns, literally. But before we get to the ships themselves, the story behind the man chosen to lead this mission, Sir John Franklin, is a drama in itself. He wasn't exactly coming into this with a perfect record.
Oh, not at all. And his appointment says so much about the class system and just the sheer desperation of the Admiralty at the time. Franklin wasn't their first choice. He wasn't the second, third, or fourth either.
He was the fifth choice.
The fifth. All the top-tier, experienced Arctic explorers, men like Perry and Ross, they all said no. They were too old, or they just felt they'd pushed their luck with the ice one too many times.
So who was the obvious choice? The one who should have gotten the job?
That would have been Captain Francis Crozier. He was Franklin's second-in-command, the captain of the Terror. He was an incredibly accomplished explorer, a veteran of polar expeditions.
But he wasn't English.
He was Irish, and from a modest background. And the idea of an Irishman claiming this ultimate prize for the British Empire, it was just politically unacceptable to the establishment. So they passed over the most qualified man and gave the command to the 59-year-old Sir John Franklin.
And Franklin had this shadow hanging over him from a previous disaster.
A huge one. His 1819 overland expedition in North America. It was an absolute catastrophe. They ran out of food, and out of 21 men, 11 died from starvation and exposure. It was just a complete failure of planning.
That's where he got that awful nickname.
It is. The man who ate his shoes. The accounts from the survivors are just grim. They were boiling their own leather boots to try and get some kind of nourishment from them. It was a national embarrassment in a way.
So this command in 1845 was his chance for redemption.
His last chance. He was a good man. By all accounts, kind, religious. But he needed to erase that stain on his reputation. So he accepted the command that 4 other men had wisely turned down, stepping right into a trap he desperately wanted to believe was his destiny.
That is just such a powerful setup. This personal quest for redemption set against this backdrop of almost clinical, over-the-top technological confidence. Which brings us to the ships. These tools of treachery, the Erebus and the Terror. These weren't just exploration vessels.
Oh, they were repurposed weapons of war. They were originally bomb ships.
What does that even mean, a bomb ship?
It means their hulls were built to be incredibly thick and sturdy, designed to withstand the massive recoil of firing huge mortars. So the thinking was, if they can handle that, they can handle crushing polar ice.
They really were the space shuttles of their era.
Mm.
What was the big game changer, the piece of tech that was supposed to make them unstoppable?
It was the steam engine. They took a locomotive engine, basically, and fitted one into each ship. It was only about 25 horsepower, but it was revolutionary.
The first Royal Navy ships to have steam power.
The very first. And then they could push through fields of slushy ice or fight a headwind when sails were useless. It was supposed to give them an edge that no expedition had ever had before.
And the details are just so clever. I read that the propellers could be pulled up out of the water.
Yeah, they could be retracted up into a special well in the hull to protect them from being sheared off by heavy ice. They reinforced the bows with iron plating. They even ran steam pipes through the decks for a kind of central heating system. It was all designed to conquer the cold.
They thought of everything. Or they thought they did. Because that confidence, that absolute faith in technology led them to their single greatest and most fatal mistake. The provision.
The food. That's where it all goes wrong. They sailed with 3 years of supplies, a library of over 1,000 books, scientific instruments.
But the crucial thing was the food. They weren't just taking barrels of salted beef and hardtack.
No, they embraced the future. Canned food. They carried 16,000 tins of canned meat, soup, and vegetables. It was a technological miracle. Nutritious, fresh-tasting food that would last forever.
16,000 tins. But the problem wasn't the idea, it was the execution.
Yeah. A catastrophic failure of quality control. The sources are very clear on this. The contractor who got the job, a man named Stephen Goldner, was rushed. He had to produce all 16,000 of those cans in just 7 weeks.
7 weeks? That's insane.
It's an impossible timeline for a handmade process. And because they were rushing, his workers got sloppy. They used huge, thick gobs of lead solder to seal the cans, and a lot of that solder dripped down inside onto the food.
So they were basically marinating their food in lead.
From day one.
Ah.
And that wasn't all. Because of the rush, a lot of the cans weren't cooked properly, so they were sealed up with botulism and other bacteria already breeding inside. The men were eating poison and spoiled food from the very start of the voyage.
That is an unbearable irony. The one thing they trusted to keep them healthy was actually a slow-acting poison. But it gets worse. There was a second source of lead, wasn't there? Another piece of cutting-edge technology.
Yes, the desalination system. Both ships were fitted with these amazing stills that could turn seawater into fresh drinking water, a brilliant idea for an expedition that could be trapped in frozen salt water for months on end.
And the pipes were made of lead?
The pipes, the condensers, the tanks, it was all lined with lead. So every single drop of water they drank, every cup of tea they made to warm themselves up, it was all flowing through lead, leaching more of the heavy metal into their systems.
So they're eating lead and they're drinking lead.
Constantly. 24 hours a day, they're being poisoned by the two things most essential for their survival. It was a perfect, insidious trap to lead by their own technology.
The stage is set with just this deadly perfection. The expedition leaves in May 1845. The last time anyone sees them is July 12th, spotted by a whaling ship in Baffin Bay. And then, nothing. Just silence. A silence that stretches on for years.
And that silence takes us right into the next part of the story, the trap closing and the poison beginning to do its work. That first winter from 1845 to 46 actually seemed to go pretty well according to the records they left behind.
They wintered over near a place called Beachy Island. They used that reinforced hull, packed snow around it for extra insulation, and fired up the central heating. From the outside, it was a picture of Victorian ingenuity succeeding. Morale was apparently quite high.
Morale was high, but the poison was already working. We know that 3 men died that first winter, and their graves, found years later on Beachy Island, became the first real clue.
It wasn't necessarily alarming for 3 men to die on an Arctic expedition, but those bodies, when they were finally examined, told a story.
They were the first smoking gun. When scientists exhumed them in the 1980s, the bodies were perfectly preserved by the permafrost, and the analysis of their hair and tissues showed dangerously high levels of lead.
Already, after less than a year.
Already. It proved the contamination was massive and immediate. These men were already sick. They were already being poisoned long before things got truly desperate.
So spring of 1846 comes, the ice breaks up, and Franklin has a choice to make. He pushes south towards King William Island. This is the moment, isn't it? The decision that seals their fate.
This is where you have to wonder if the lead poisoning was already starting to affect his judgment. He gets to King William Island, and he has two options. He can take the safer known route down the eastern side, or he can take a shortcut, the direct route, west through a channel called Victoria Strait.
And he goes for the shortcut.
He gambles and goes west. It was a catastrophic mistake.
Mm.
Victoria Strait is a natural ice trap. Currents from the north and south converge there, and they just jam the channel with this incredibly thick, ancient, multi-year ice. It's not just ice, it's like mountains of frozen concrete.
He sailed his iron-plated, steam-powered ships right into a dead end, believing his technology could brute force a path through.
Exactly. And the Arctic just closed its fist around them. In September of 1846, the ice froze solid, and the Erebus and Terror were trapped.
Yep.
Permanently, they would never sail again.
So they're stuck. They spend that entire next winter, 46 to 47, completely frozen in place, and all the while, the poison and the disease are just working their way through the crew.
We need to really understand what was happening to them physically. It was this horrific combination. First, scurvy was setting in. The canned food, it turns out, didn't have the vitamin C that traditional lime juice provided. So you have men with bleeding gums, swollen, agonizing joints, and just crushing fatigue.
Every movement must have been painful.
Excruciating. And then you layer the lead poisoning on top of that. Plumism. It attacks the nervous system. It causes terrible muscle weakness, crippling stomach pain, and maybe most importantly for their survival, it clouds your thinking.
So they're confused, they have headaches, they can't think clearly.
Their judgment is impaired. Imagine being an officer trying to make life or death decisions for 100 men, but your own mind is failing you. And we know from the remains that tuberculosis was also rampant. So they're weak, they're confused, they're coughing up their lungs, and they are trapped in a metal box surrounded by endless ice. The technology that was supposed to save them was actively destroying them from the inside out.
It's just unbelievable. And while all of this is happening, the only word we have from them, this paper trail they left, it starts with this heartbreakingly false sense of optimism.
Right. In May of 1847, a small party travels over the ice and leaves a standard note in a stone cairn on King William Island. It's just a pre-printed form, and they fill in the blanks.
And it says what? All is well.
Basically, yes,
No.
all well. It says Sir John Franklin is in command and that they've successfully navigated a good portion of the passage. It's a snapshot of routine, of procedure, right before the abyss opens up.
But just a few weeks after that note was written, everything changes.
We know this because almost a year later, another party goes back to that same stone cairn. They take out the original note and they add a new desperate message scrawled by hand in the margins.
And that update, it's the turning point.
It's the first official record of the disaster. It's dated June 11th, 1847, and it reports that Sir John Franklin is dead.
Wow. Just like that.
Just a simple statement. He died. We don't know how. The scurvy, the lead, a heart attack, we'll never know. And command now falls to Captain Crozier. The Irishman who should have had the command from the start now inherits a dying expedition.
And while this is all unfolding in the Arctic, back in England, Lady Franklin is starting to panic. The expedition is overdue, but the Admiralty just brushes her off.
Completely. They kept pointing to the 3 years of supplies. They said, don't worry, their fine Arctic voyages always run long. They did not want to spend the money or risk the lives to launch a rescue for an expedition. They were still convinced was about to return in triumph.
But Jane Franklin was not someone you could just brush off.
She was a force of nature. She basically invented the modern public pressure campaign. She went to the newspapers, she lobbied politicians, she raised money, she offered huge rewards. She shamed the British government into action.
So her campaign works. They finally agree to send search parties.
They do. In 1848, the first ships head north. But it was already too late. By the time they even left England, Crozier and his men were making their final, desperate move.
Let's go back to the ice. It's April 1848. By this point, another winter has passed. 24 men are dead, including Franklin, and Crozier has to make a choice.
He realizes that staying on the ships is a death sentence. The ice has held them for 19 months. It's not letting go. So on April 20th, 1848, the 105 survivors abandoned the two most advanced ships in the Royal Navy.
I cannot imagine that moment, leaving the relative warmth and safety of the ships to walk out onto the ice.
And their plan was just It was born of desperation. They loaded these heavy lifeboats onto sledges. We're talking 3-ton sledges, packed with whatever they could carry. And they were going to try and drag them 150 miles south to the back river, hoping to find a trading post.
150 miles, dragging the weight of a small truck in their physical condition?
It was impossible. And before they left, they went back to that cairn one last time and updated the note. That final message is one of the most haunting artifacts in polar exploration.
What does it say?
It confirms everything. It says the ships were deserted on April 22nd. It gives the death toll: 9 officers and 15 men. It states their intention to march south, and it's signed by Crozier and Captain Fitzjames. It's the last official word. The paper trail goes cold right there.
And from that point on, the story descends into just pure horror, this march of death. Can you paint a picture of how hopeless that journey was?
You have to try and visualize it. These men are skeletons. They're wasted by lead poisoning. Their muscles are gone. They're in agony from scurvy. Their joints are swollen and bleeding. And they're trying to haul a 3-ton sledge across a landscape of jagged, broken sea ice. It's not a march, it's a crawl.
And they started leaving people behind.
They had to. Men would collapse, and they'd put them in a tent with a little food and a promise to come back for them. A promise they knew they couldn't keep. The search parties later found the bodies scattered over miles and miles. A trail of death.
This is where the story takes its darkest turn. For years, no one knew what happened after they left the ships, until the searchers started talking to the local Inuit, the only eyewitnesses.
The Inuit testimony is absolutely crucial. They told the searchers about seeing starving, desperate white men staggering south. They described finding their camps, and they described what they found in those camps.
Human remains.
Yes, but not just remains. They described finding human bones that had been processed. They had clear-cut marks on them, consistent with flesh being systematically removed.
Oh my God.
They reported that skulls had been cracked open and that long bones were broken, which suggests that the marrow had been extracted. The unavoidable conclusion the story the Inuit told was that the Franklin survivors had resorted to cannibalism to survive.
And when this news got back to Victorian England, the reaction wasn't horror, it was denial.
Total outrage denial. The Admiralty, the press, Charles Dickens even wrote essays about it. They refused to believe it. They said civilized British sailors would never, ever stoop to such barbarism. They accused the Inuit of being liars, of being savages who had killed the men themselves and were trying to cover it up.
They chose to protect their idea of national character over the truth from the only people who are actually there.
It was cultural arrogance at its absolute worst. And that denial just fueled the obsession. The search for Franklin became this multi-decade quest, costing more lives and more money than the original expedition. More than 50 rescue missions went out.
And there's that incredible irony that one of the rescue ships actually found the Northwest Passage while looking for Franklin.
Exactly. A ship called HMS Investigator, its captain, Robert McClure, found a navigable route. He found the prize. But even his ship got trapped in the ice and had to be abandoned. The Arctic always won.
So this official narrative of heroic, noble death persisted for over a century, until science finally provided the proof that couldn't be denied. This brings us to the 1980s.
It's the critical moment of truth. In 1981, a team of scientists goes back to Beechey Island and exhumes the bodies of those first 3 men who died,
Yeah.
ones buried in the permafrost.
And because they were so perfectly preserved, they could do modern autopsies. What did they find?
The first thing they found was the lead. The levels in their hair and bone were astronomical, far beyond anything survivable long term. It was the first hard scientific proof that the expedition was being poisoned by its own food supply from the very beginning.
And then later finds on King William Island confirm the rest of the story, the darkest part.
Yes. Later archaeological work uncovered more remains, including what seems to have been a mass gravesite. And when they analyzed those bones, they found the proof.
The cut marks.
Unmistakable knife marks, exactly where the Inuit had said they would be. The patterns of dismemberment were clear. The science proved, 140 years later, that the Inuit had been telling the truth all along. The sailors had consumed their dead.
So they were poisoned into a state of weakness and confusion, and then driven to the ultimate taboo. An act their own country refused to believe was possible, leaving the truth frozen for a century.
The sheer scale of the suffering is just. It's almost impossible to comprehend.
So even with that confirmation, the final pieces of the puzzle were still missing. The ships themselves, they remain lost for 170 years.
And their discovery, which is really recent history, it's just added this incredible final, pregnant chapter to the story. In 2014, a Canadian search team finally located HMS Erebus in shallow water
But it was the discovery of the Terror in 2016 that was truly mind-blowing. They called it a ghost ship.
because it was perfectly preserved. It's sitting upright on the ocean floor, almost completely intact. The cold, dark water saved it. Divers who went inside said it was like swimming into a time capsule. Plates were still stacked on shelves in the officer's mess. Window panes were unbroken. It was just eerie.
As if the crew just got up and walked away. And the artifacts they've found have suggested one last heartbreaking detail about the end, haven't they?
They have. The evidence now suggests that after the main group of 105 men started their death march south, a small group, maybe a handful of men, actually went back to one of the ships.
Why? Why would they go back?
We don't know for sure. Maybe they were looking for more supplies. Or, and this is the theory that I find so moving, maybe they were officers who knew the march was hopeless, and they chose to return to the ship to die with some measure of dignity within the structure and symbol of the Royal Navy rather than out on the ice.
That adds such a layer of human tragedy to it. So when you pull the camera back and look at the whole story, from the ambition to the forensics, what's the ultimate lesson here? What's the so what of the Franklin expedition?
I think the central painful lesson is about technological hubris. Franklin's expedition was destroyed by the Victorian era's absolute unshakable faith in its own ingenuity. They believed that iron and steam and canned food could bend the Arctic to their will.
And those very things were what killed them. The food poisoned them, the water poisoned them.
And the steam engines, their great weapon, became a liability. They needed coal, a resource they couldn't get. They fundamentally underestimated the environment they were going into. They thought their technology made them masters of nature, but the Arctic was indifferent. It just took them.
It's a lesson that still feels incredibly relevant. And that brings us to the final haunting irony of this whole story, the Northwest Passage itself, today.
The very route that Franklin and the 129 men died for.
Yeah.
It's opening up. The multi-year pack ice that trapped the Erebus and Terror, that was seen as this permanent, unconquerable barrier, is melting. It's retreating faster and faster every year.
And it's not opening because we finally built a better icebreaker. It's open because we're fundamentally changing the planet's climate.
It's the most bitter victory imaginable. The human ambition that drove Franklin, that desire to conquer and exploit, has finally succeeded in reshaping the Arctic. But it's a success that signals a global catastrophe. The passage is becoming a reality because the world that Franklin knew is vanishing.
The story really does endure as this monument to ambition and to tragedy. The ships sit there on the seafloor, these perfectly preserved tombs, and the men rest in the frozen ground.
And I think the final thought we should leave you with is this. Franklin's expedition was destroyed by a blind faith in his own advanced technology, a technology that had hidden fatal flaws, canned food, a water purification system. Think about our world today. How much of our modern lives, our global system, rests on complex technologies that we implicitly trust but may not fully understand? How many hidden poisonous shortcuts are we relying on right now? That lesson from 1848 feels more urgent today than ever.
A truly dark and powerful story. Thank you for taking us through this deep dive. It's one that will definitely stick with me.